You can't even imagine what it feels like to hold your wife's hand as she takes her last breath, while your only son is thousands of miles away, posting vacation photos with his wife. If you think you know how this story ends, you're in for a shock. Because what happened after my son missed his mother's funeral changed everything I thought I knew about family, loyalty, and forgiveness. Before I tell you what I did when he came begging for help, I want you to do something for me. If you've ever felt betrayed by your own blood, or if you've ever had to choose between your pride and your heart, hit that subscribe button, like this video, and share your story in the comments. You're not alone, and your voice matters here. Let me take you back to the day my wife died. The hospital room was quiet, except for the steady beep of the monitors and the soft hum of the machines. I sat by her side, holding her hand, whispering all the things I never said enough. She squeezed my fingers, her eyes full of love and regret. "Take care of him," she whispered. "He's lost." I promised her I would, even though my own heart was breaking. My son, Daniel, was supposed to be there. He knew how sick his mother was. He knew this was the end. But instead of coming home, he boarded a plane to the Bahamas with his wife, Sarah. "We already booked the trip, Dad," he said on the phone, his voice casual, almost annoyed. "We'll come see Mom when we get back." I tried to reason with him, tried to make him understand, but he wouldn't listen. "She'll be fine," he said. "She's always fine." She wasn't fine. She died that night, with only me and the nurses by her side. The next day, I called Daniel. He didn't answer. I left a message, telling him his mother was gone. He texted back hours later, "I'm sorry, Dad. We'll be home in a few days." The funeral was small, just a few close friends, some neighbors, and me. I stood by the grave, listening to the priest's words, feeling the weight of Daniel's absence like a stone in my chest. People whispered, asked where he was. I lied, said he was stuck overseas, that he'd tried to make it. But the truth was, he chose a vacation over his own mother's last goodbye. If you've ever been left alone to grieve, you know how deep that pain goes. But you also know that sometimes the only way to survive is to keep moving forward, no matter how much it hurts. What would you do if your own child missed the most important moment of your life? Would you forgive them, or would you let the anger eat you alive? Let me know in the comments. And if you haven't seen our story about the father who was left behind at Christmas, watch it next. Sometimes the people closest to us are the ones who hurt us the most. A few days after the funeral, Daniel and Sarah finally came home. He didn't look me in the eye. He hugged me, stiff and awkward, and said, "Sorry, Dad. The flights were a mess." Sarah stood behind him, sunglasses on, scrolling through her phone. I wanted to scream, to ask him how he could be so cold, but I bit my tongue. I just nodded and walked away. For weeks, we barely spoke. Daniel went back to work. Sarah posted more vacation photos, and I tried to put the pieces of my life back together. I thought that was the end of it. I thought I'd lost my son for good, but then, one evening, Daniel showed up at my door. His face was pale, his eyes red. "Dad, I need your help," he said, his voice shaking. "Sarah wants a divorce. She says I'm selfish, that I don't care about anyone but myself. I don't know what to do. Please, help me save my marriage." You might be wondering what I said to him. Did I forgive him? Did I help him? Or did I finally take the last step he never expected? I'll tell you, but first, let me ask you, What would you do if the child who broke your heart came back, begging for your support? Would you open your arms, or would you close the door? Let me know in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe, like, and share this story, because what happened next will leave you speechless. You ever look at your own child and wonder if you even know them anymore? That's how I felt as Daniel stood in my doorway, desperate and broken, asking for help. I saw the same boy I'd raised. The one who used to run to me with scraped knees and wild stories, but now he was a man, lost in ways I never imagined. I let him in. He sat at the kitchen table, head in his hands, while I made coffee in silence. The house felt emptier than ever, my wife's absence a shadow in every corner. Daniel finally spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "Sarah says I'm selfish. She says I don't care about anyone but myself. She's right, isn't she?" I wanted to tell him the truth. I wanted to shout, "Yes, you are selfish. You missed your mother's last breath for a vacation." But I held back. Instead, I asked, "Why did you really go, Daniel? Why weren't you here?" He stared at the table, unable to meet my eyes. "I couldn't handle it, Dad. I didn't want to see her like that. Sarah said it would be easier if we just got away for a while. I thought I'd have more time. I thought she'd wait for me." If you've ever heard your child admit to running from pain, you know how complicated forgiveness can be. Part of me wanted to comfort him, to tell him it was okay. But another part of me, the part that sat alone at my wife's funeral, wanted him to feel every ounce of regret. Daniel wiped his eyes. "I know I messed up. I know I let you down, but I can't lose Sarah too. Please, Dad, talk to her. Tell her I'm not a bad person. Tell her I can change." I took a deep breath, searching for the right words. "Daniel, saving your marriage isn't about what I say. It's about what you do. You can't run from your mistakes forever. You have to face them. You have to own them." He nodded, but I could see the fear in his eyes. "Will you at least talk to her, please? If you've ever been asked to fix a mess you didn't make, you know how heavy that burden feels. What would you do if your child begged you to save them from the consequences of their own choices? Would you step in, or would you let them learn the hard way? Let me know in the comments. And if you haven't seen our story about the father who took the last step his son never expected, watch it next. Sometimes the hardest lessons are the ones we teach by letting go. That night, I sat alone in the living room, staring at the old family photos on the mantel. I thought about my wife, about the promises I made to her, about the son we raised together. I wondered what she would do if she were here. Would she forgive Daniel? Would she fight for him, or would she let him face the consequences? I didn't have an answer. But I knew one thing: I couldn't carry Daniel's guilt for him. He had to find his own way back. The next morning, I called Sarah. She answered, her voice cold and tired. "What do you want?" I told her I just wanted to talk, to understand. She agreed to meet for coffee. When we sat down, she looked exhausted, her eyes rimmed with tears. "I love Daniel, you know," she said, "but he's never there when it matters. Not for me, not for his mother, not for anyone but himself." I listened as she poured out her pain. Missed anniversaries, broken promises, the way Daniel always put himself first. "I can't do it anymore," she said. "I need someone who shows up. Someone who cares." You ever watch your own child fall apart and realize there's nothing you can do to put them back together? That's how I felt as Daniel sat on my couch, his shoulders shaking, his face buried in his hands. I wanted to reach out, to comfort him, but I knew this was a pain he had to feel. Some lessons can't be taught, they have to be lived. The days that followed were heavy. Daniel barely left the house. He called Sarah, texted her, begged her to talk, but she kept her distance. I watched him pace the living room, replaying every mistake, every missed moment, every selfish choice. He asked me again and again, "Dad, what should I do?" And every time I gave him the same answer. You have to show her you've changed. Words aren't enough anymore. One afternoon, Daniel found an old photo album, pictures of him and his mother, birthdays, holidays, the two of them laughing together. He sat with it for hours, silent, tears running down his face. "I took her for granted," he whispered. "I thought she'd always be there. I thought I had more time." If you've ever lost someone you love, you know how those regrets can haunt you. But you also know that regret is only useful if it leads to change. That night, Daniel came to me with a plan. "I want to write Sarah a letter," he said, "not to beg her to come back, but to tell her the truth. To tell her I'm sorry. To tell her I finally understand what I've lost." He spent hours at the kitchen table, pen in hand, pouring his heart onto the page. When he finished, he handed me the letter. "Will you read it, Dad? Tell me if it's enough." I read every word, raw, honest, full of pain and hope. He didn't make excuses, he didn't blame anyone else. He just told the truth. "I missed my mother's last moments because I was afraid. I missed your needs because I was selfish. I want to be better. I want to show up. Even if you can't forgive me, I needed you to know." If you've ever seen your child take responsibility for their actions, you know how powerful that moment can be. What would you do if your child finally owned up to everything? Would you believe in their change, or would you wait to see if it lasted? Let me know in the comments. And if you haven't seen our story about the father who took the last step his son never expected, watch it next. Sometimes the hardest step is the first one toward redemption. The next day, Daniel delivered the letter to Sarah. He didn't wait for a response. He just left it in her mailbox and came home, quieter but somehow lighter. "Whatever happens, Dad, I know I did the right thing." That night, I sat on the porch thinking about my wife, about the promises I made to her, about the son we raised. I realized that sometimes the only way to honor the people we've lost is to help the ones who are still here find their way back. You ever feel the weight of hope and dread at the same time? That's what it was like waiting for Sarah's response to Daniel's letter. Every time the phone rang, Daniel jumped. Every time the doorbell chimed, he looked up, hope flickering in his eyes. But days passed, and there was nothing. I could see him slipping back into old habits, doubt, self-pity, anger at himself and the world. One evening, as I was making dinner, Daniel came into the kitchen, his face pale. "Dad, what if she never forgives me? What if I ruined everything for good?" I put down the knife and looked him in the eye. "Son, forgiveness isn't something you can demand. It's something you have to earn, and sometimes you have to accept that you might not get it." He nodded, but I could see the fear in his eyes. "I just wish I could go back. I wish I could do it all over again." If you've ever watched someone you love wrestle with regret, you know how helpless it feels. But you also know that sometimes the only way forward is through the pain. That night, there was a knock at the door. Daniel froze. I opened it to find Sarah standing on the porch, her eyes red but determined. She asked if she could come in. Daniel stood in the hallway, hands shaking. Sarah sat at the kitchen table, Daniel across from her. I gave them space, listening from the living room as they talked. Sarah's voice was quiet but steady. I read your letter. I believe you're sorry, but I need more than words. I need to see you show up. I need to see you be the man your mother raised you to be. Daniel promised he would try. He didn't beg, didn't plead, just listened, nodded, and accepted her pain. For the first time, I saw a glimmer of the man I always hoped he'd become. If you've ever witnessed a moment of real honesty between two people, you know how powerful it can be. What would you do if you were in Sarah's place? Would you give Daniel another chance, or would you walk away? Let me know in the comments. And if you haven't seen our story about the father who took the last step his son never expected, watch it next. Sometimes the hardest forgiveness is the one we give ourselves. After Sarah left, Daniel sat in silence. Do you think she'll come back, Dad? I shrugged. That's up to her. All you can do is keep showing up. For her, for yourself. The next morning, Daniel got up early. He started helping around the house, called his boss to ask for extra shifts, and even volunteered at the local food pantry. He didn't do it for show. He did it because he wanted to change. If you've ever seen someone you love finally take responsibility, you know how bittersweet it feels. There's pride, but also a sadness for all the time lost. That night, as I sat on the porch, I thought about my wife. I hoped she could see us now, her son trying to become a better man, her husband learning to let go. I realized that sometimes the last step isn't about revenge or justice. It's about giving someone the space to grow, even if it means letting them go. You ever realize that sometimes the hardest thing to do is nothing at all? That's what I learned as I watched Daniel try to rebuild his life. One small step at a time. He stopped asking me to fix things for him. He started showing up for himself, at work, at home, in the community. He called Sarah every few days, not to beg, but just to check in, to ask how she was, to let her know he was thinking of her. Sarah kept her distance, but I could see her walls slowly coming down. She'd drop by to pick up some things, stay for a cup of coffee, sometimes even join us for dinner. The conversations were awkward at first, but gradually the tension eased. Daniel listened more than he talked. He apologized when he needed to, and he didn't make excuses. One afternoon, Sarah and I found ourselves alone in the kitchen. She looked at me, her eyes tired but kind. "He's really trying, isn't he?" she said. I nodded. "He is, but you don't owe him anything, Sarah. You have to do what's right for you." She smiled a little sadly. "I know, but I also know people can change. I just need to see it last." If you've ever watched someone you love try to earn back trust, you know how slow and painful the process can be. But you also know how every small victory feels like a miracle. Daniel started going to therapy. He joined a support group for people dealing with grief and regret. He even started volunteering at the hospital where his mother spent her last days, helping families who were going through what we had. I saw him grow, not just as a son, but as a man. If you've ever seen real change in someone you thought was lost, you know how powerful it is. What would you do if you were in my place? Would you keep hoping? Or would you protect your heart? Let me know in the comments. And if you haven't seen our story about the father who took the last step his son never expected, watch it next. Sometimes the best thing you can do is step back and let life teach its own lessons. One evening, Daniel came to me, his eyes clear for the first time in months. "Dad, I know I can't undo what I did, but I want you to know I'm grateful you didn't give up on me. I'm not asking you to fix anything. I just want you to be proud of me again." I hugged him, feeling a mix of pride and sorrow. "I never stopped loving you, Daniel, but I am proud of the man you're becoming." That night, as I sat alone in the quiet house, I realized that sometimes the last step isn't about what you do for someone else. It's about what you let them do for themselves. You ever look at your family and realize that healing isn't a straight line? That's what I saw as the weeks turned into months. Daniel kept working on himself, and Sarah kept her distance, but the air between them was changing. There was less anger, more understanding. Sometimes that's all you can hope for. One Sunday, Sarah joined us for dinner. It was the first time in a long while that it felt almost normal. We talked about old memories, about my wife, about the things we missed and the things we still had. Daniel was quieter, more thoughtful. He didn't try to dominate the conversation or make jokes to cover his guilt. He just listened, and when he spoke, it was with honesty. After dinner, Sarah and Daniel took a walk in the garden. I watched them from the window, their silhouettes moving slowly under the fading light. I didn't know what they were saying, but I could see the hope in Daniel's posture, the way he reached for her hand, the way she didn't pull away. If you've ever watched two people try to find their way back to each other, you know how fragile those moments are. But you also know how much courage it takes to try again. Later that night, Daniel came inside, his face a mix of relief and uncertainty. "She said she's willing to try," he told me. "No promises, but she's willing to see if we can rebuild." I put my hand on his shoulder. "That's all you can ask for, son. Now it's up to you to keep showing up." If you've ever been given a second chance, you know how precious it is. What would you do if you were in Daniel's shoes? Would you fight for your marriage, or would you let the past keep you apart? Let me know in the comments. And if you haven't seen our story about the father who took the last step his son never expected, watch it next. Sometimes the last step is the hardest, but it's also the most important. As the days passed, Daniel and Sarah started spending more time together. They went to counseling, took small trips, and slowly began to trust each other again. It wasn't perfect. There were setbacks, arguments, moments of doubt, but there was also laughter, forgiveness, and hope. One evening, as we sat on the porch watching the stars, Daniel turned to me. "Dad, I know I don't deserve this chance, but I'm going to do everything I can to make it right." I smiled, feeling a peace I hadn't known in a long time. "That's all your mother and I ever wanted, for you to find your way, even if it took losing everything first." That night, I realized that sometimes the last step isn't about revenge or punishment. It's about letting go of the past and choosing to believe in the future. You ever realize that sometimes the greatest act of love is letting someone find their own way? That's what I learned as Daniel and Sarah slowly rebuilt their marriage. I watched them struggle, stumble, and get back up. Together. There were days when I wondered if they'd make it, and days when I saw a glimmer of the couple they used to be. Sarah started coming around more often, sometimes just to talk, sometimes to help with chores. She and Daniel went to therapy, worked through old wounds, and learned to communicate in ways they never had before. I saw Daniel change, not just for Sarah, but for himself. He became more patient, more present, more willing to admit when he was wrong. One afternoon, Daniel and I sat on the porch, watching the world go by. He turned to me, his eyes clear. "Dad, I know I hurt you. I know I hurt Mum. I can't change the past, but I want you to know I'm grateful you didn't give up on me." I looked at him, feeling a mix of pride and sadness. "We all make mistakes, son. What matters is what we do next. Your mother would be proud of the man you're becoming. If you've ever watched someone you love grow after hitting rock bottom, you know how bittersweet it feels. There's pride, but also a lingering ache for the time lost. What would you do if you had the chance to start over? Would you take it, or would you let regret hold you back? Let me know in the comments. And if you haven't seen our story about the father who took the last step his son never expected, watch it next. Sometimes the best revenge is living a life you're proud of. As the months passed, Daniel and Sarah renewed their vows in a small, quiet ceremony. There were no grand speeches, no big parties, just a promise to keep trying, to keep showing up, to keep loving each other, even when it was hard. I stood by their side, remembering my own wedding day, remembering the promises I made to my wife, and feeling a sense of peace I hadn't known in years. That night, as we sat together as a family, I realized that sometimes the last step isn't about what you do for someone else. It's about what you allow them to do for themselves. Daniel had to lose everything to find out what really mattered, and in the end, he found his way home. You might think a story like this ends with a grand apology or a dramatic reunion, but the truth is, real healing happens in the quiet, everyday moments. As the seasons changed, so did our family. The pain of Daniel missing his mother's final moments never fully disappeared, but it softened, becoming part of the fabric of our lives, a reminder of what we lost and what we found again. Daniel and Sarah settled into a new rhythm. They still had their struggles, but they faced them together. They learned to forgive, not just each other, but themselves. I watched them grow, not into the perfect couple, but into two people willing to fight for what mattered. Sometimes that's all you can ask for. One evening, as we sat around the dinner table, Daniel raised his glass. "To Mum," he said quietly, "for teaching us that love is worth fighting for, even when we don't deserve it." We all drank to her memory, the silence filled with gratitude and a little bit of sorrow. After dinner, Daniel and I sat on the porch, watching the stars. He turned to me, his voice steady. "Dad, I know I can never make up for what I did, but I want you to know I'm not running anymore. I'm here. I'm trying, and I'm grateful you let me figure it out on my own." I smiled, feeling a peace I hadn't known in years. "That's all I ever wanted, son, for you to find your way, even if it meant letting you fall first." If you've ever had to let go of someone you love so they could find themselves, you know how hard it is. But you also know how rewarding it can be to see them come back stronger, wiser, and more grateful for the second chance. As the months passed, our family found a new kind of happiness. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. We honored my wife's memory, not by clinging to the past, but by building something new, something she would have been proud of. If you've made it this far, thank you for being part of my journey. Maybe you've faced your own heartbreak, or maybe you're still searching for a way to heal. Whatever your story, know that you're not alone. There's always a way back, even from the deepest pain. So what would you do if your own child let you down in your darkest hour? Would you hold on to anger, or would you give them the space to grow? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Your story might be the hope someone else needs. And if this story touched you, please subscribe, like, and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Check out our other videos, especially the one about the father who found redemption after being cast aside. Because sometimes the most powerful stories are the ones we live through and the ones we choose to tell. Thank you for listening. Hold your loved ones close, and remember, forgiveness isn't weakness. It's the ultimate strength.